Well, good morning, Vivek. Thank you so much. And good morning and namaskar to everybody who's listening in. I'm deeply honored by this invitation from the Apeejay School of Architecture and Planning. And I know that you are doing some great work and coming up with new ideas in the field of architecture. So I also want to wish you the best for future going forward. On The first thing that I should start off actually by, before I come to climate change, is that cities will be the driving force in the future. In our country, the urbanization has remained much below the levels that our comparative peer countries have. Official data show that it's about 38% of our population resides in cities, but even if you include the unofficial data, etc., and the peri-urban area and so on, it's still much below. For example, in countries like Malaysia and China, in the Philippines, etc. So I say this because if urbanization and cities, smart cities, are going to be the major economic driver for not just economic growth, but also for innovation, for also for new ideas, and for and for education and all of that, then it's you lot, it's the architects who the next generation of this, who will have a very much bigger role than what they have had in the past in shaping the geography, in shaping the economic geography, in shaping the topography of our country as we go forward. So it's really you must be very conscious of the huge responsibility that is coming on you, as it were, that is already on you, for determining whether or not India would be able to not just achieve its nationally determined targets for climate change, which we have announced at the Paris conference, but overall, in terms of, as I said again, and I repeat myself, in terms of rapid economic growth, sustainable economic growth, equitable economic growth, innovative economic growth. I think that's so. I think I wanted to start here because I've noticed in the last 4 years that I've been in NITI Aayog that there is not enough attention given either by the policymakers, and I admit this to myself, and even with the corporate world, etc., on the importance of cities and urban dwellings and urbanization, in the country's, in the country's future. Rural development and agriculture still take a much larger, even if you look at the budget, and that's the best way to look at it, the budgetary allocation, to those areas are much bigger and much larger than what you have for urban. And I think it's time to think of reversing it, as it were. That's the first part. The second part is that we have just done a study within NITI Aayog about the capacity for town planning in the country. The architects is one thing, and that committee that we had, the very senior most people, the director of SPA and the directors of other institutes, and there's a society for town planners, etc. All of them there, and we have come out with a report, and I request you to have a look at that report. It will soon be launched, as it were, in the Ministry of Urban Affairs. The secretary himself and other secretaries were a part of that. The realization is that there is not enough capacity for town planners in this country. There are not just enough town planners. I mean, there are 4,000 positions for town planning that are there, but a large 43% of them are still vacant. Every urban local body is supposed to have a town planner, and they don't have it. And wherever they do have those town planners, they are much more in the nature of regulators rather than being able to design and develop and imagine how a new town should be. I mean, it's a fact that there are not too many Chandigarhs in our country where there could be. I mean, in the last 60 years that we've spent urbanizing, I'm afraid we have lost a huge opportunity to make our country more beautiful and to make our dwellings much more, friendly to our people, etc. So I think that again, I'm saying this, which is not, and it's a part of climate change is going to be a part of it. If you lot go into, commit yourself to creating towns and cities which are not just which are human friendly, which are eco friendly, and which are, as it were, ecologically friendly, then you will create a new India, which is what we are wanting, which is what we are aspiring for. I mean, why should our country, cities and towns not be pedestrian friendly? When I remember the time when I joined the school, it's a different era. I came to Delhi in 1963, and I was in modern school, and I, live in the hostel, and we used to come out. Delhi was principally a cyclist and pedestrian city, and it was an amazing thing, because everybody used to be. Now today, people are scared of going out on the streets on the bicycles and on foot. And that the entire movement across the world is towards that. The entire movement is across the world is towards getting away from fossil fuel driven vehicles and means of transport, and towards cycling, electric mobility, and pedestrians. Now you can see how intimately your role as architects and town planners is connected in some sense integrally to that of the climate change and ecological sustainability. If we create cities which are ecologically friendly, which encourage people to come out and take to habits which are environmentally friendly, and not just lead sedentary lives or lead lives which are all in the fossil fuel driven vehicles, then we will be automatically providing the basis for improving our environment and our climate change. I mentioned these two things, friends, because they are directly connected with you. They are a part of your curriculum. They are a part of your training, and I'm afraid I think at least that not enough attention is paid to these features in most schools, if you like. And I appeal to you to not see yourself as merely builders of houses and residents and farmhouses and resorts, but as people who will shape the urban economic geography of this country. And that's what is required today. And you think of yourself as people who can reshape the whole thing. You know that the government of India has come up with 100 smart cities, and I think that's a huge opportunity now for us to contribute. And therefore, I hope that you will be able to give more attention to those things. And I know that Vivek, for example, is interested in all of this, and I think he can lend his amazing credentials and imagination to this cause of creating human, ecologically, and environmentally friendly cities, towns, and urban dwelling, and increase and sort of raise the level at which we are doing. As I said already, all this is totally, completely connected to climate change, and to preventing disastrous climate change, to remaining below the 2 degrees. Now, already today, if you've noticed, some of you might have noticed, the Economist magazine has come out with a cover, the whole issue, and the cover of that is that no way you can remain below 2 degrees. The temperatures will rise above 2 degrees. From the time that we've had this industrial revolution, and now we should be prepared for 3 degrees. And we don't know the consequences of that. And I think we have only one planet, and we need to safeguard it. But also, it's a part of our Indian tradition, which is that our tradition is it's a cliche almost now, but it's Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. But let me put it the another way, which is that we in the Indian tradition have never sought to conquer nature. That's a Occidental, that's a Western tradition. That we will conquer nature, we will command all its elements and components and bend them to our will, to the human will. And that is what causes the anthropogenic sort of disaster that we've had, because we will want to do everything in our own image, in our own desire and way. That's not been our tradition. Our tradition has been to live with nature. Our tradition has been to, Prakriti for us is as important as Paramatma, if you like. Prakriti is a part of our being, and we have had traditions where we have worshipped trees, and and our gods include animals and snakes and all of that, because we know that that's what the balance is all about, and that's what our tradition is. I think it's high time today, that we re-emphasize this tradition in our studies, in our curriculum, in our own mental makeup. That look, how do we make our environment such that it is least disruptive to the nature, that it blends with nature, it doesn't impose upon nature. And second, and that's the important, second, that it is as resource light as possible. The more resources that we use, from the nature to build our own dwellings, the more harm we do, and that's a fact. I mean, the greater carbon footprint you will have. So now I think the time has come for Indians and for us to go back and to look back into our own traditions, where what were the features that made us more nature friendly. I remember as a child when I grew up and so on, it always was that your windows and doors should face east and west, so that there is a cross ventilation, and you didn't need as much cooling as you did otherwise. I mean, that was standard practice, and we also knew that your walls could be thicker so that they could retain the heat during the summer and become retain the heat during the winter, and the ceilings were higher so that they could remain cool during the summer. All of these features and the material that we use, whether it's I mean, there were buildings earlier, that they didn't use cement and mortar and steel, and the very large buildings, from Lucknow. I invite you to go there, and you will see the Bada Imam Bada there with a hall as long, I think, is about 120 feet, zero girder, zero steel, and they all made it out of out of brick construction in the nature of an arch, where all the load bearing, etc. And the walls were much thicker, and then they were hollowed out to make the ceiling was hollowed out, a 9-foot ceiling, hollowed out, which has now created a labyrinth, which has become a tourist attraction. There is a Chadar Manzil there in Lucknow, where the domes, when they were discovered for repainting, were just made out of mud, little arch bricks, and there was no weight on them, but they look beautiful. I'm saying all of this because I think the time has come to go back and look for and search for, the nature-friendly, material and nature-friendly building technology, nature-friendly building, building practices that we've had in our country for a while. Why do I say this? Because one, that we ourselves have committed to, given our the national determined targets, where we say that we will achieve 70% reduction in our carbon emissions as we go forward by 2035. I think that's the target that we give. We are under now tremendous pressure to declare the date for net zero, because everybody else has been declaring it somewhere 2030, 2035. China, I think, has also even come up. China, the largest emitter of carbon, greenhouse gases and carbon emissions, has now come out and said that 2050 they will become net zero, and we will be under constant pressure to do so. Now, I don't. Somebody can ask that, and I've seen people asking this question. Well, why do we want to do this? We are. It's inequitable in the human history for countries like India to care about the carbon constraint or the carbon footprint or the greenhouse emissions, because all the developed economy, the Europeans and the Americans and the rest of them, they developed without a care to all of these things. They had no carbon constraint, and therefore they are the ones responsible for bringing us where we are today. And their per capita emissions are 10 order of magnitude higher than what we are, and we are still in the process of our development. So why should we do this? We don't want to. Let's do what maybe even China has done, to go full head into our development, not bother about the climate, and then retrofit afterwards, as the Europeans and the Americans and now the Chinese are trying and doing actually. So why can't we do the same? Friends, of course, by the way, there is one other even stronger argument that I've just read from a senior professor who used to be at the University of Colorado, that in any case, the human intervention and the anthropogenic intervention on climate change is simply very marginal. It doesn't have any meaning. Whatever you do will not affect it, because one volcano eruption a year or in every 6 months, it takes care of everything that you want to do overall. Or, if there's a stronger sun flare coming out our way, then it takes care of all the, anti-warming measures that you might have taken. I'm not sure of those things. I'm not a scientist, but I still feel that those are givens which are given for centuries. And despite that, it is our responsibility, to do whatever we can, simply because what's happening today in our daily lives is going to be unacceptable to us. Let us put it like this. Let us for a minute say that, okay, we don't want to bother about the planet. We feel strongly about the iniquity being handed out to us. The Westerners have done all of this. Why should we? Let's forget all even that. Let's forget also the fact, that why should we now suffer these extra costs of making our urbanization and our habits and our consumption more environment friendly. But the fact is that that the 14 most polluted cities in the world are in our country today. You know that when you go out in our cities that you are living in, it's difficult to breathe. And people suffer from respiratory diseases. Our children, our young children, our babies are constantly suffering from that. The incidence of respiratory diseases, you go to any hospital, they'll tell you, is much higher. So you can't, you and I can't, and now the same thing is getting extended to the rural sites. Stubble burning is taken as a right, by people. Now that simply can, and why do they do that? Because what they see is that everybody else in the country who are living in these cities, etc., they don't give a damn about what they are doing in pollution. They are driving all their cars and buses and emissions and so on. And so why should we bother? So it's the whole country then is on the verge of getting into a situation where it will become a very unhealthy environment to live and bring up our children. And that's what we don't want to do. So I'm saying that it's in our personal, specific, individual interest to ensure that our environment is cleaner, that what we have, we conserve our water that we have. We get 4% of fresh water of the world with 16% of the population. But also the fact that we get the highest rainfall, and yet we are a water scarce country today. We are facing a water emergency today. Now, how do we handle this? And if we don't handle this, what will happen? I mean, you've heard already of, interstate water wars, inter-village water wars. I remember the time when the bird sanctuary near Bharatpur was deprived of water because the villages upstream would not let the water come into the rivulet which came there. We need to avoid all of this. And what is the way forward to avoid all of this? The way forward to avoid all of this is to become more conscious of the climate change, to do whatever we can to prevent the climate change, etc., going forward. I said all of this simply to refute the arguments that ours is not the responsibility. And about retrofitting, let me say that I think the time has gone where you could pollute today and retrofit tomorrow. It's just gone, because if you do that, you will see consequences, what are called in economics as irreversible changes, which you won't be able to reverse. I agree that there was mercury in the Bay of Tokyo. There was so much pollution in River Thames that the joke used to be that if you put your hand in, only half the hand will come out. And now they are growing trouts there. But those are gone. Those days are gone. Because if you notice today, and I invite you, that the mighty Amu Darya, the Oxus River flowing out of Pamir Plateau into the Aral Sea, doesn't reach the Aral Sea now in near Turkmenistan. As a result, what happens is that the half of that sea has dried up. The southern half is dried up. And Kazakhstan has built a dam in the middle of that sea so that the northern part of the sea can be saved. And the southern part is totally dried up. The sea floor is exposed to the elements, and all the chemicals that were thrown into that are now swirling around in the atmosphere with the winds and causing respiratory problems in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. And I can cite you many, many examples of last 20, 30 years where now you've reached situations which are irreversible. For example, that the warming is causing the ice caps to recede and decline. And what they're saying is that if we continue with this, There will soon be a point where both the Antarctic and the Arctic ice caps, which are so critical for our existence, will not happen. Already, you know that there is a northern passage which has been driven through the Arctic because the ices have melted and the waters have come out, and that's being used. So, friends, we cannot delay this any longer. We have to take this on ourselves. Climate change, is the climate change, the environment, the greenhouse emissions, the carbon content in the atmosphere is a binding constraint on us and on our development practices as we go forward. So we have to take deep cognizance of this, and we have to change our habits. We have to change our way we do things. We have to change the way we live, we design, we produce, we manufacture, and most importantly, the way we do our agriculture as we go forward. And now therefore, I want to come to the last part because that's often not emphasized enough. We are all urban dwellers, and we think, therefore, that the pollution problem is an urban problem. I'm afraid it is, but also it's not. The rural and agricultural problem is also a much bigger problem where you have to devote your attention to. 25% of greenhouse gases come out of agriculture because of the cows, because of the cattle and methane and all the standing water and the rice, which gives out methane everywhere, etc. 25%. You know that 94 to 96% of the water is used in agriculture. So whatever you might do, and these are all good habits, that switch off your tap while you're brushing your teeth and not let the water run. All of this is very good. And I hope also that you will design buildings and houses in future which mandatory have optical sensors for lights to go off when people go away from the rooms. We don't have that now. No, nowhere. All over Europe, it's pretty much mandated that you have, all of that is very good. We should do that. We should do, and make our houses require less cooling, and so therefore not just build steel and, glass structures, but things which are different. All of that is good. And this is why I started off with the importance of urban, efforts in urbanization to prevent climate change. But I want to bring to your notice that agriculture and your intervention in agriculture could be equally important, if not more important, because that is where our battle for ecological sustainability, water conservation, greenhouse gas emissions will be won or lost. Because that's where the huge majority of this is going on. And here, as I said, what is happening is 25% of greenhouse gases, and they come from not just the water and the cattle, but also the great amount of chemicals we throw onto our agricultural land as we go forward. All the chemicals that we throw, inorganic chemicals that we throw as fertilizers, as weedicides, as pesticides, all of them result in carbon being generated away from the land and into the atmosphere. And this also has two aspects. One, it increases the carbon content in the atmosphere, but two, it degrades our land. It degrades our land, and we are coming towards a point where increasing amount of our land in this country is now becoming barren, is becoming arid or semi-arid. There is a desertification process that is ongoing at the moment, where there was none to begin with. And there is an Institute of Soil Sciences in Bhopal established during the British days, and they have long record. And I just met with them and I called them over to NITI Aayog. They were telling me that before independence in the 19th century, the carbon content in our soil was 2.5% or more. And today, on average in this country, it is 0.5%. Where has all this carbon gone? It's gone into our atmosphere, and that's what has improved. That's what has increased the pollution. And how do we prevent it? Is there any way to prevent it? Fortunately for us, we found that there is a way to reverse this. And the way to reverse this is to take up what we in NITI Aayog now call natural farming, chemical-free farming and agroecological farming. Even President Macron has declared that I think by 2030 or 2040, I forget the date, French agriculture will become chemical-free. And it is time that we now put much more attention on this than what we've done in the past. 30 lakh farmers in India are already practicing it successfully. There is zero chemical inputs going in there, and as a result of which, what happens is, and there are examples that you can see in Haryana, in Maharashtra, in Gujarat, and in Himachal, where this has led to a revival, a reversal of the carbon content in organic carbon content in the soil. It's gone up. This can become the largest carbon sequestration program that you have in this country. That's a very important thing that to remember. The second aspect of this is that it uses this carbon chemical-free agriculture uses less than 1/4 of the water that is required for chemical-based agriculture. Less than 1/4, so that all your water that you are pumping out, and where villages after villages in the Punjab and so on are now reaching limits of their water, underground water reservoir, and are getting fluoride and arsenic into their water, etc. That can be prevented. The amount of pumping that you do can be reduced. And moreover, the plants, just like the rainforest, the crops and the orchards that you grow, which are chemical free, have the ability to fix water from the atmosphere. And the water from the atmosphere, I don't know how many of you know, it was news to me that an agro-scientist called Walter Yane from Australia has now published this, and I think is well known, that the amount of moisture in the atmosphere is 7 times the water content that you have on surface and underground put together. As a result of which, as you know, the Israeli scientists have now developed machines where you can compress air and get pure water, and they've now put water ATMs in their cities, because Israel, as you know, is a forefront, is a runner for water technology and using green solar energy to desalinate water, because they're a water-starved country from ever before. So that's the amount of water that we can achieve from the moisture that we go forward. So once you reduce the pumping of water, it means, of course, that you need less energy to go forward, because you use now fossil fuel or electricity to get the pumps going. That itself is more energy efficient, that is more climate friendly, because the less energy that you use, the better off you are. But friends, so I think I wanted to point towards this, but let me end by saying that today in the government of India, there is a deep cognizance, deep recognition of the fact that we need to take steps to prevent further climate damage in our country, which is why the Honorable Prime Minister has declared the target of 450 gigawatts of renewable power by 2030. We've achieved 16 times the growth in renewables in the last 5 years than we had in the previous 40 years. Our solar and wind and hydro and nuclear programs are on full steam, as it were, and we are looking for alternatives to go forward there. Energy is the most important source of greenhouse emissions and carbon emissions, and we are going to decarbonize as much as possible the energy sector. We are also therefore moving towards electric mobility. I'm sure you've seen the advances that we've made in the last 2 years towards electric mobility, the FAME 1 and the FAME 2 scheme that we've got. The electric mobility mission is housed in NITI Aayog. Very soon there will be standardized chargers for all 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers, I think within a matter of months. And after that, we are planning to mandate that we will become completely fossil-free 2- and 3-wheelers by 2030. We will make sure that our roads, all the 2-wheelers, which are 67% of the vehicles and the pollution, become, switch to electric mobility. So that's the way, that's what we're going to forward. But, shifting to renewables of solar and wind and others has a problem of intermittency, because what happens during the monsoon? There is no sun. So where do we get the energy from? Which is where we are trying to now also propagate and advance very much the switch to green hydrogen, to use our solar energy to convert, to produce green hydrogen either through electrolysis which is using a lot of, it uses electricity through the fuel cell to convert, to break up water into hydrogen. And this green hydrogen can then be used instead of fossil fuel, coal or oil or diesel, even in industries like fertilizer, cement, and steel. So, which are the industries where it's very difficult to decarbonize them, but green hydrogen can be the way forward. Friends, we are moving, I think, quite irrevocably into the hydrogen era. This is where, if we focus our attention, India will be able to leapfrog into the new technology. We won't have to follow the linear path of going from. We can switch to that, and green hydrogen has the great advantage that it will reduce our import dependence completely. $140 billion of oil and gas today we import at the moment. But if we go the green hydrogen way, I'm sure by the time we celebrate the 100th year of our independence in 2047, India would have achieved, India can achieve, India should achieve a green economy which is based on solar and green hydrogen, and which is based on wind and green hydrogen, or hydrogen and electric mobility. And I think that future beckons us. It's in your hands. By the time in 2047, you will be in the prime of your life. You'll be in the 40s and so on. And I think it is up to you to commit yourself to say that we in India will make this country such that we will develop, we will achieve rapid growth, high rapid growth, increase our per capita incomes, double them, triple them, but while retaining sustainability and environmental friendly way of life. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Sir, just one last point. Since major constituents of our participants are class 11th and 12th students, any final message for them, for the school students who are part of this webinar?
Well, I think in any case, Vivek, today the 16 is the new 35. So these are much wiser people, and I mean, they don't need any special, attention from what I've said to the college students. But yes, for them, I think it is even more important, because they can actually, because schools have the great liberty, they have the great luxury of having summer and winter vacations. I'm not talking about the COVID time when there's been a absolute mess, but those summer and winter vacations should be spent in the rural countryside, in agriculture, in propagating green agriculture, in propagating chemical-free agriculture. Because I think that is where, and they would also learn they learn to connect with that nature and with agriculture. Being a sort of an urban, sort of exclusively an urban dweller is not a balanced life. That's what I can say. And just as a model, as an example, I can let everybody know that my wife and I, we have our own farm, and we go there every month and be with be with our crops and be with our cows and be with our orchards. So I should think that the younger kids and schools should actually put it in their curriculum, as to how they interact, with nature and with agriculture and with rural folks. But that's a more balanced life, and that will give them a much more balanced view, a world view, and the whole thing about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam will become a reality rather than just a cliche.